Hello, folks, and welcome to Week 4 of the Homies Fantasy Football Weekly Recap Show. We've got an exciting week to go over, and I just got to say that it was a great week. What a fantastic week. I don't know how you guys feel, but I just feel like, what a great week. It was just so good. But anyway, we're going to dive right into those scores. I do want to let you know we've got a special announcement coming at the end of this video, so make sure you stay tuned all the way until the end. But for now, take it away, Schmitty.
Thanks, Kamish. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another exciting edition of your weekly Homies Fantasy Football Score Recap. A lot of good scores and everything to get into for this week, so without further ado, let's get right into it. We're going to start off with David taking on Craig. Craig coming in at 3-0, trying to remain undefeated. And in this week's group chat, we had a lot of discussion between whether Craig was worthy of his 3-0 spot due to some points scored and, opponents he had faced and things like that. It's the nature of fantasy football. It's how things go. But with that, to be fair, Craig's team didn't quite put up the points required for this week. We'll start with his side, and overall, just not a lot of good to talk about. Kirk Cousins has been really solid this year, comes out and scores 12. Running backs both hit double digits, which is acceptable, but overall was just a lot of mediocre scores. Travis Kelce, being a big guy, you expect a lot of points out of every week, just 6. And so while it was a lot of solid production out of each of Craig's players, it really wasn't enough to put up a solid scoreline this week, as he wasn't even able to hit the century mark. Just overall a week to forget for Craig. And on the other side for David, quite the complete opposite. Aaron Rodgers, nice game of 26. James Robinson, 20. Cordell Patterson getting a bulk of that workload in the big game for Chicago's offense this week, getting 34 points, 3 receiving touchdowns. Robert Woods, who hasn't been anything all too spectacular this year, but manages 14. DJ Moore with a massive game of 31, and it all just led to this massive outpouring for David's team, dropping 154 points, which, by the way, gets him the high score for this week. Nice to be able to pass that torch on to someone else. Congratulations, David, on that. And that led to a blowout for our first game of this week. Final score, David with 154, Craig with 97, taking his first loss of the year. David moving to 2-2. Next up, we got Dakota taking on Carlos. Both teams coming in 2-1. We're in store for a good matchup here, and overall, it wasn't a bad one. We'll start on the side of Dakota, solid 21 out of Lamar. Running backs, though, a little weak. Alvin Kamara with just 12, 120 yards, but just couldn't manage any touchdowns. Miles Sanders just with 7. Deontay Johnson, nice big game of 24, and then comes Brandon Ayuk with a measly 2. Jamar Chase, Darren Waller, both in double digits. Not a terrible scoreline out of Dakota for the most part. Moving over to the side of Carlos, though, nice game out of Josh Allen with 22. Both his running backs popping off, doing quite the opposite of what Dakota's did. Derrick Henry with 25, David Montgomery with 22. And in the tight end spot, kind of a bold start, Max Williams from the Cardinals, wonder why that was chosen, with a very nice game, 17 points. Overall, very solid week for Carlos. Very good production out of a lot of his players, and it led him to take the victory over Dakota. Final score, Dakota 110, Carlos 137. Dakota falls at 2-2, Carlos up to 3-1. Next up, an interesting one, a low-scoring affair to say the least. This one between Carlos and the Commish. Carlos coming in 0-3, the Commish coming in 1-2. Both teams looking to find some ground in this season. We'll start on the side of Carlos, and not a lot of big stuff to talk about. Tom Brady and his return to New England breaks the all-time passing record and overall has a nice game yardage-wise, but no touchdowns to show for it, gives him just 13. Overall, fairly weak games out of the running backs, 11 and 8. DK Metcalf, Jacoby Myers, both with nice games. But really, other than that, just a lot of mediocre performances out of Carlos's team. And just like Craig, not able to break the century mark this week, just 85 points. Very seldom is there going to be any week in which that gets that done. An overall, very unfortunate week for Carlos. We'll move over to the other side for Adam. And Adam's score this week essentially came down to a few guys. Newly acquired Joe Burrow coming out and having a nice game with 25. Terry McLaurin with a lovely game, 123 yards and 2 touchdowns, getting him 30 points. Tyler Boyd coming alive with 20, and Leonard Fournette with 16. All solid scores there, and the rest of his team, all single digits. Dalvin Cook and Chris Carson, 2 guys that have been very good backs for a long time, and also this season, 6 and 4 points, respectively. Adam's fantasy fetish, Odell Beckham Jr. with just 4 points, and tight end Logan Thomas taking a donut. Rough week for Adam's team, managing just 112 points, but fortunately, he was playing Carlos, who managed to have a significantly worse week. Hey, you're going to have those weeks. You're going to have those guys that just have enough big games to get you through, and that pushed Adam to take the victory. Final score, Carlos 85, the commish 112. Adam moving to 2-2, Carlos falling to 0-4. We might be seeing who's going to be taking this punishment at the end of the year. Next up, we've got Matt taking on myself. Matt coming in 1-2, yours truly coming in 3-0, off a very good season so far. Through 3 straight wins, 3 straight weeks of the highest points, things are riding high, and as expected, it all had to come to an end at some point. We'll start on the side of Matt's team. Kyler Murray, great game, 24. Saquon Barkley finally putting up some big numbers with 29. Figures it has to be this week of all weeks. Edwards-Helaire with 19, and Darrell Henderson with a nice 15 points. Other than that, not a lot of big scores. Receiver core really didn't do a lot for him, but had a lot of big numbers out of the rest of those guys to push him through. On the other side for me, not a lot to talk about this week either. Russell Wilson with a nice 23, Zeke with a nice 20, loving that. But after that, it's just mediocre performance out of mediocre performance. My receivers, just like Matt's, not much of anything to talk about this week. Just a lot of low-end performances, not what has been usually happening the last few weeks, and it all had to come to an end, unfortunately. A lot of these guys had to, come back down to earth at some point. Shame it all had to happen all in the same week. I barely passed the century mark, just a measly 103 points. Matt takes the victory. Final score 127 to 103. Matt moves to 2-2. I take my first loss, moving to 3-1. Moving into our last 2 matchups, we've got a couple of really good ones to talk about here at the end. We'll start off with Will taking on Orton, a matchup of the negative Nancys. So no matter who came out this week, somebody was going to be complaining, and complain they did. Orton very early on in the day, already chalking the game, saying it's over. Enjoy your win, Will. Take it and run with it. Well, didn't quite end up that way. And funny enough, this game even came down to Monday night. Raiders taking on the Chargers. The score was deadlocked at 118 heading into Monday night, and it was Hunter Renfrow from the Raiders taking on Justin Herbert of the Chargers. Quarterback always in favor in a matchup like that, and well, that's the way it ended up. We'll take a look at some of the other scores, though, on Will's team. 20 out of Ryan Tannehill, having a nice, solid week with his 2 top receivers out. Najee Harris, Justin Jefferson, both with 20 points as well. Pittman Jr. and Mark Andrews, both with 11. And Hunter Renfrow in that flex spot on Monday night, getting 16. A solid week for Will. Only thing you really can complain about there is the lack of production out of Aaron Jones. Just 10 points. I'd like to see a little more, but 134, really not much to complain about this week for Will's team. But on the other side for Orton, his quarterback spot took the edge in Monday night and got him that win. Justin Herbert with a very nice game against the Raiders with 23. Antonio Gibson with 15. Devontae Adams, not a lot to talk about, but does manage 12 points. Amari Cooper in a game he went out for a little bit with injury, does manage to get a touchdown to get him 15. Deebo Samuel with a massive game of 35 points. Another big score that made the difference. Dawson Knox with 20. A very nice week out of Orton as well. 141 points. That 7-point edge that Herbert got him gave him the W on Monday night. That's going to hold off the complaining for a short amount of time, but I'm sure we'll be back to it here in just a couple days. Final score, Will with 134. Orton 141. Will falling to 1-3. Orton moving to 2-2. And our final game of the week, we've got Jose taking on Patrick in another massively close game, and some very, very interesting scores out of the individuals here to talk about. We'll start on the side of Jose, who had some absolutely massive scores out of Patrick Mahomes with 33, Austin Eckler with 28, and Tyreek Hill with 47, just another week for him, I guess. 11 catches, 186 yards, and 3 touchdowns. And that was damn near all of the production for Jose's team this week, because other than that, 2 donuts, a -6 spot out of his defense, and a lot of single-digit performances as well. Did manage to put up 138 with those big numbers he got out of those guys, but a wild scoreline to look at for Jose this week. Just a very heavily weighted production on a few of his guys that kept him in the fight against Patrick. But as we look on the other side, Patrick himself had a nice week. His running backs Jonathan Taylor and Kareem Hunt with 20 and 15. Stephon Diggs having a nice game with 18. Kenny Golladay with 17. Chase Edmonds with a nice 17 points. And while we're talking about weird individual scores, we'll take a look at his defense, which you can't see over here on the scoreboard, but a 22 spot out of the Bills defense, managing 4 picks and a fumble recovery, taking on the battered up Texans. Just a massive disparity in that defense spot, -6 to 22. Wild scoreline to look at. And while we're at it, we'll shout out the kickers too, as they each hit double digits. Justin Tucker with 10, Matt Prater with 12. Final score in this one, Jose 138, Patrick with 141. A very, very close matchup with some weird scores, but a very close game, a well-fought one. Jose falls to 1-3, Patrick moves to 3-1, and that is going to do it for this week's scores and highlights. We'll send you back to the commish to take us out.
All right, thank you, Schmitty, for another incredible recap of all of this week's scores and the action that took place. Now it's time for the announcement that you've waited this long to hear. Next week, we are revealing the penalty for the loser of the Homies Fantasy Football League. So make sure you tune in next week so you can hear how whoever loses will have to be penalized this year for all of our entertainment. Well, that's it for this week. Thank you again for tuning in. We got some exciting stuff coming up. Make sure you keep those trades coming, the smack talk flowing, and as always, have fun. See you later.